All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is 1 o'clock. Welcome to this Black Hills Information Security webcast on intro to Windows Event Collecting. Yep, I saw it. We got Nick and Noah here today from our active SOC team here at Black Hills. We actually do have a SOC. It's like we learned all these things from being pen testers, red teamers, threat hunters, and we're like, what if we defended? What if we defended? Okay, so Nick and Noah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, it's all yours. I'm going to go off and I will let you know if there's anything wrong. But if not, keep proceeding as normal.
Thanks. Good luck, Jason.
Sounds good.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are talking about Windows Event Collecting and Windows Event Forwarding. This is intro to Windows Event Logging. Myself, Nick Caswell, and Noah Heckman is with us. There are our handles on Twitter. Feel free to follow us. I'm not very active on Twitter, so if you follow me, tweet me. It'll be 8 months before I see it.
All right. So kind of as a intro to this whole talk, first off, did any of these group know that Windows actually has a free built-in centralized logging solution? Yeah, it actually does. So it's forwarding of Windows events and collecting. So we're going to be covering that today. We also are going to be talking about Sysmon, which just adds extra visibility to your system. We're going to talk about how you would set up all these stack of tools manually, but then we're actually going to show you how to do it way faster because, nobody likes to do that. So
what is Windows Event Forwarding, Windows Event Collecting? The forwarder is your Windows host, your Windows endpoint that you want to send specific logs. The collector will be a centralized host that will actually store all of those logs and ideally send them off to a SIM. Doesn't have to, but that is the ideal scenario. Some things to note about Windows Event Forwarding and Collecting is it does utilize WinRM, so that's port 5985. That is the HTTP protocol for WinRM. You can use HTTPS, which is 5986. For this talk, we're just going to talk about 5985. Also note that we're not using the 5986 HTTPS option because the logs are actually encrypted with Kerberos before they leave the endpoint, and the collector is the only endpoint that has the private key to decrypt them. So we're not actually worried about double encrypting the logs. So as far as deploying Windows Event Forwarding, WinRM is required, as we stated. WinRM is enabled by default on Windows Server 2012 R2 and later, but it is disabled on all workstation OSs. So if you want to collect your events from your workstations, you're going to have to get WinRM enabled. For event forwarding, it's easiest to do through group policy. I believe there's actually a registry key you can manually modify, but that's a lot of tedious work. You will apply that group policy to all the endpoints which you want to collect logs from, and that policy will tell the endpoints what collector they need to communicate with, and that collector will start to communicate details about what logs it needs to be forwarding to the collector. So last term we want to talk about as far as Windows Event Forwarding and Collecting before we start bringing it all together, and Noah covers Sysmon for us. The Windows Event Collector is made up of multiple subscriptions. Subscriptions are either source or collector initiated. We'll get a little bit more into detail on that. And it also defines what hosts are in scope for the subscription. The subscription determines what logs are actually going to be forwarded. So that's the event channel, the event IDs, critical, the log level type. You can also work off keywords and other things you normally do in the Windows Event Viewer. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute. Well, let's talk about Sysmon.
Yeah, so the other thing that we add to the stack that we like to use in our SOC is Sysmon. Some of you might know about Sysmon, some of you might not, but basically it just increases the visibility. So Nick, if you go to the next slide, we can kind of talk about why we actually need Sysmon. So I apologize if this is a little small. Looking at it now, it looks a tad small, but this is the standard Windows 4688 log, which is a process creation log. And if you look at it, it gives you some information. You're getting the process command line. Sometimes you can get the parent process name, but very rarely will you get the actual PID itself. Sometimes you'll get the PID of the new process, which is right there in that new process ID, as well as your elevation type. But it's just, while this works and you can use this in an investigation, it's just not as detailed as the next log we're going to show you, which is the actual Sysmon log 1. So this is a Sysmon log 1. And as you can see, we just have a ton more information here, including things like the SHA hashes and the MD5 hash. We have the parent process ID. We have the parent process name. We even have the parent command line. Like this just adds a ton more visibility, but it does more than just increasing your visibility for things like process creation. It also covers subjects that are just completely not covered by Windows logging, at least not directly, which would include things like network connections, DNS lookups. We can track file creation or destruction. We can even use Sysmon to archive files. So if you want it to take in, like, one example is like PowerShell transcript logs. With our Sysmon configuration that we've configured, if you delete the PowerShell transcript logs, it will actually archive those logs. It'll let you delete them, but it'll save a copy that only system can access on that host. So you can look, it'll look like you're covering your tracks. And as far as you're aware, like you were possibly successful, but we can still recover those. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, this is just an example of a Sysmon Event 22 DNS lookup. So I did a pretty simple thing to make this fire. Obviously, I just used MS Edge, went to google.com, but as you can see, there was a query made. You can get the query results and the query status. So you can get the user that made the request and the executable that requested it. Yeah, all this information just really increases your visibility. That's why we added in. You don't have to use Sysmon, but we like it. It's super handy. So Sysmon can be queried in a number of ways. We'll find in our repo that we talk about here a little bit, like we're kind of assuming you're going to want to send this to an Elastic Stack. And I did see a question regarding WEX for an MSSP style thing. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to ship that up to an external SIM, but you don't technically need that. With built-in Windows event collecting, you can actually just use the event log viewer on the WEC itself. Now, that requires you to have your log size set up a certain way. You're going to want to expand that to be the maximum size that you possibly can in order to increase your retention. It's not ideal, but it will work, and it's free with your Windows licensing. So you can literally just go into your event viewer. You can use your filter. You can filter by an event code 22, and then you can go to the find option. If you're looking specifically for like Google, you can just hit find. It'll find it just like as if it were searching like a Word document. Now, it's not the fastest. I would definitely encourage you, the more logs you get, you're going to want a better search engine, but this does work. We kind of outlined the stack that we're using just a little bit, and now we're just going to kind of talk about how you would actually implement that, put it all together. So half of it's about identifying the tools you want to use. The other part is actually how would you implement that into an environment. What we're going to be doing, we're going to be setting up Sysmon. That's going to be feeding into the Windows event logs on your host. And then we're going to be taking those host logs and shipping them to Windows event collecting host using Windows event forwarding. To start off with Sysmon, you're going to need a config. Just saw a question about that. There's a couple configs we can recommend. We have, of course, Sysmon modular is a really good one. It's a little bit of a heavy hitter. It does take up a little more resources than, say, like the Swift on Security Sysmon config. And then we also have our own config. There's a bunch of configs. I wanted to list a whole bunch of them, but I only had so much room in the slide. This bottom link here is our custom config that we actually use for our SOC operations. So feel free to steal that and use that if you want. We're making some changes to that in the near future as well, but that's what we currently have. And that's a port of Sysmon modular. All right, so installing Sysmon is actually super easy. You can literally just use this command line and it will install in. So as you can see, I've got this animation here. That's it. That's all you have to do. You run that, it installs, you're done. Sysmon is already logging to your system. You can do this either via like your software management solution. We have a GPO option built into our deployment methodology that we can use that uses like a UNC path. Nice thing is that covers updates. It also covers some things like the Sysmon archive log. If your Sysmon archive log fills up, that can be a bit of a trick because that can only be emptied out by the NT Authority system user account. So like we actually have a PS1 that runs on a scheduled task. If you update the config file, it updates it on all the host systems. If you update the binary, it updates it on all the host systems. But you can develop that as you want. All you need at a base level to get Sysmon running is literally just this command line.
Now that we've kind of got some terms out of the way, understand what Sysmon is doing, why it's beneficial, and how we're going to get logs from it, let's actually talk about setting up the Windows Event Forwarding and the Windows Event Collecting. The Windows Event Forwarding, as we talked about, is a group policy object. I underlined here the relevant policy path. Once you go there, you're going to set the policy to enabled and then give it the FQDN of your Windows Event Collector host, followed by the WSMan/subscription manager path. I hope you can still see in my screenshot there. That will be the WinRM path that hosts will use to connect to the WEC and get the subscription set, so it'll understand what logs are relevant, what logs it needs to be sending, and if that subscription is applied to it as a host. One thing to note, this is using HTTP, as you can see based off that URL there. It is using WinRM, port 5985. A lot of firewalls, in my experience, have seen this traffic as abnormal HTTP traffic. So you may want to consider, if you are having problems with Windows Event Forwarding and your collector is on a different network, it's behind a firewall, say to the host that you want to get logs from, it's probably worth looking at those logs for either 5985 being blocked or potentially abnormal HTTP traffic being blocked between the two. So once you have that group policy created, we still have to get WinRM automatically started on all of our workstation endpoints. So we can create a group policy for that. At the very bottom of this page, you can see I underlined the relevant policy path again. Pretty simple. Once you go into there, just right-click, create a new service. You'll define WinRM. It's actually the Windows Management Remote Service, as I recall. It's got a very long name, but we all know it as WinRM. We prefer in our SOC deployments to set it as automatic delayed start. There's probably some arguments for people that want to start automatically. We prefer to leave it as a delayed start, just have better success. It is worth noting that you can create the WinRM enablement on the Windows Event Forwarding group policy, but that's least desirable depending on your ecosystem and your environment, how things are carved out. We generally recommend creating this as a separate policy so it's managed more easily and more easily identifiable what it's doing in your environment. So now that we have the group policies created to start doing some of the magic, we actually have to enable the Windows Event Collector service. There's two ways of doing it. There's a one-liner. It's a wecutil wc/q, or you can actually open up your event viewer, click on the subscriptions on the left-hand pane, and then you'll get a nice little dialog box about, do you want to start the Windows Event Collector service, excuse me, a little tongue-tied. Once you hit yes to that, it'll actually go into the services console, set that Windows Event Collector service to automatic delayed start. So this thing will start acting as a WEC at that point. Now for the painful part. That was all really easy and well to do. The subscriptions are actually very cumbersome, painstaking and tedious to manage and maintain. You are best off to create subscriptions separately through either their category, their type. You don't want to create just one subscription and tag all logs to be affiliated with that subscription. You will have problems. You also don't want to collect all logs because, well, you're going to overload your host simply. We definitely will get some guidance here on how we have best found to break up these subscriptions by like authentication type, or maybe a security type, or maybe it's PowerShell, or maybe it's OS management type logs. Some of these event channels that we're talking about, these categories or types, you will want to capture all the event IDs because there's just not a lot of them. PowerShell is a great example for that. There's other log channels like the security channel where there are tons of events and you only care about a subset of them. So it's very important when you're creating these subscriptions that you understand what you're targeting when you start to create it. You're getting all the appropriate event channels within the scope, and that you are getting all the irrelevant event IDs that are pertinent to what you want to see in your logs. So I'm going to show you what some of this looks like. Actually, going back for a second, if you look at the event viewer screenshot here in the right pane under actions, there is a create subscription button. That is how you get to this wizard right here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Subscription name, you can choose the destination folder. We prefer to use forwarded events just because the way we utilize when log beats. But we can also see that there's an option for collector initiated or source computer initiated. This is important to note. With the collector initiated, you cannot specify an Active Directory group of computers. With the source initiated, you can. So with the collector initiated, from what I can best discern, Microsoft wants you to have exact knowledge of what computers you want to get logs from. You're going to specify them explicitly within the collector initiated settings. With source initiated, you're probably going to just want to collect everything that comes up on your domain, new, old, didn't know about. If it's domain joined and getting the right policies, you want as logs. So when you actually do the source computer initiated, you can specify the domain computers and the domain controllers, computer groups, and that will just make sure that they were within scope for your subscription throughout its duration.
The other thing that allows is that if you have more computers than will fit in a single WEC, you can actually split it up into your sites, and we have that built into as well. But if you have to, for some reason, split up into multiple sites, you're pulling across a T1 or something like that, you can actually attach it to the OU for that specific site and have it go to its own individual WEC.
Yes, sir. That is correct. With the event to collect, you'll see it's the select events button down here towards the bottom of the wizard. What you'll start to see inside there looks a lot like a filter for Windows Event Viewer. You can start to specify the event level, the actual log channel. I specified all the PowerShell ones within that dropdown. It's actually a dropdown. You don't have to type it, but it's a long dropdown, which makes this all the more tedious to walk through and click and make sure you didn't miss one. Of course, then you can also add the event IDs, keywords, users' computers that are maybe relevant to something specific you're looking for. What's interesting is if we look at this, there's also an XML tab. So when we start to look at this in XML, it becomes obvious maybe this is a little bit more easy to manipulate and make automated. So that's definitely going to be a piece of the puzzle we'll show you here in a little bit later. But this is for comparison, the Windows PowerShell subscription that we have created, just capturing all event IDs for the relevant PowerShell channels. But then if we look like the security one to the right, we're only capturing a subset of event IDs that we know are relevant and that we care about. So what are some pitfalls to watch out for?
Yeah, so pitfalls are interesting. This is stuff that we picked up over time of doing this. First off, this is just a general Sysmon pitfall, but Sysmon can generate an absolutely insane amount of logs, which is why your config is really more of a dam of these against these like just massive inflow of logs than it is like explicitly saying what you do or don't want. Because if you just turn on Sysmon and let it do, you're just going to like crash your computer. It'll take up every resource it has, tracking every single change your computer makes. Your computer's constantly making those changes, as a lot of people know. So if you have Sysmon monitoring for every single one of them, it uses a ton of resources. Not to mention you can do things like fill up disk space or RAM or anything else. So that's something to keep in mind. The config you use is going to have to be somewhat tuned to your individual use case. I usually recommend that for just about anyone because there's not a one-size-fits-all Sysmon config. There's going to be things that you're specifically interested in that other people might not be. So pick one that's a good start. Like I said, Sysmon Modular tends to hit a little heavier than, say, like the Swift on Security one. A lot of people like Swift on Security. I think it also depends somewhat on the hardware you're running. If you're running really lightweight hardware, then I would stick with something lighter. If most of your systems are running pretty beefy hardware, then you can do that too. Sysmon Modular, I've not had a lot of problems with it so far, and it gives us some really good visibility. Another thing is the network service account. It's going to need to have access to the log readers group. And that's something that was troubleshooted out by both Nick and myself at one point, where we just were poor at communicating with each other sometimes. And like he solved the problem, and then I'm like, one day I just like, man, I can't figure this one out, or I just figured this out. It was super annoying. And Nick's like, oh yeah, no, I figured that one out a while ago too. But the network service account needs to have access to the log readers group. If it can't ship those logs to your event collectors. So you're just going to get a standard like 102 WEC error. It's super annoying. Not exactly the most fun thing to troubleshoot. Another part of that is that the security log on your DCs is not necessarily going to allow that access. As soon as you apply the GPO, you actually were going to have to restart your DCs usually. So just know that when you're deploying the solution, you're going to possibly have to do a restart of your DCs, which is going to mean you're going to need to go through change control and everything else. I mean, you're going to go through change control anyhow, but it just adds one more thing to your list. But be prepared, know what you're getting into. It's going to require a reboot of your DCs.
That's right. Thanks, Noah. Want to just bring it up again, WinRM is required. So make sure that if your Windows Event Collector is on a subnet or network that may be firewalled off between your Windows Event Forwarders and your collector, you're probably going to have to put some sort of rule in there to allow WinRM through to the collector. Also, just want to mention again that traffic does look like to some brand firewalls abnormal HTTP traffic. So while you may have an allow rule in there, it may still hit a security policy for like abnormal HTTP traffic that will then still block your traffic. So something to watch out for there.
And there was a question about whether or not you can use HTTPS. You totally can use HTTPS. It just means that you're managing SSL certificates at that point.
Yep. And you're then re-encrypting the already encrypted logs. So at that point, we decided it was not worth dealing with the PKI. Of course, you're more than welcome to. Microsoft builds in that functionality, but that's kind of where we landed on our choices. Otherwise, make sure you right size your WEC. There is multiple guides out there or calculators to help try and give some calculations for WEC sizing. That's not something I'm going to try and give off the cuff on this webcast or to anybody without knowing your ecosystem, your environment, what kind of logs you are interested in. My best advice is if you want to stand this up on your own, start collecting logs, I would collect a small subset of your organization first. Maybe that's 10, maybe that's 50. Watch for CPU, memory, disk IOPS on that collector host. Understand, how that changes throughout the day as, log volume is high, as you bring on more log sources, and then grow your WEC accordingly to what you see resource utilization doing.
Yep. And there was a question too of asking if you have to use physical hardware or VMs. You could totally use VMs. In fact, I usually prefer it because it's way easier to upsize it as you're going along.
Yep.
So yeah, totally use VM.
And also worth noting, depending on your ecosystem, your environment, you may have a use case for multiple WECs. That could be a branch office, your main site, your data center all have their own WEC. That way you're not shipping them over an expensive WAN link. Or it might just be that you have so many endpoints within one physical location, you just need multiple hosts to maintain the collection of all those logs. So that's something you'll just kind of have to organically discover and understand about your environment as you stand up Windows Event Collecting.
So now that we've gone through all those settings that you're going to have to set manually, we're going to now just kind of go real quick over like how to do that all in like 5 minutes. So there's a link down right here to the GitHub repo that Nick and I run. And yeah, if you go to the next page there, Nick, we got an actual screenshot of it there. So we basically did all the heavy lifting for you. Those WEC subscriptions, the Sysmon config file, the Sysmon installer, it's all in here. And so yeah, we're not saying you have to use this, but it does help. Now, there is a couple assumptions that are being made. It does automatically install WinLogBeat, so it's kind of assuming that you're going to want to be sending this to an Elastic Stack. Nice thing is that you literally just set up an Elastic Stack, point this at it, and now you have all your stuff feeding into an Elastic Stack all of a sudden. So, yeah, that's kind of that. And that kind of leads into our demo where we're actually going to be using this tool to set this up. So,
absolutely. And there's also within this repo the subscriptions that we push to all of our SOC customers, just kind of as a baseline. I showed you how tedious those are to set up. There is 51 of them that we have currently that we maintain. They're all within this repo, and we're going to show you how to create them really fast. So with that, it's live demo time.
Yes.
I took my chainsaw to a running server earlier this morning, so hopefully the demo gods are still happy with us. What we have here, just a jump host. We're going to connect to our domain controller and our Windows Event Collector host. Get all the settings and group policies we just talked about applied, and then we're going to see logs coming into the Windows Event Collector. So without further ado, let's start on the collector itself. To show you there's no tricks up my sleeve, forwarded events is completely empty on this host. Subscriptions, nothing there. It's asking me to start the service, so it is not configured. It's going to tell it no. I have already staged the file, so full disclosure there. This is the WEC configurator that is part of our GitHub repo. You can see it in the same condition as we have it posted on GitHub. We do have our own WinLogBeat configuration file and certificate. I'm not going to share those with you for obvious reasons. But if we run our WEC configurator file here, it'll take just a moment. Download all the relevant parts, get them installed, get the Windows Event Collector service configured.
And like we said, this is installing WinLogBeat in this case, so that's why we start that WinLogBeat service.
Yep, exactly. All right, so everything is done on the collector. It told us to reboot it. Window shaped funny. I want to make sure I don't reboot my jump host. So we will revisit the WEC in a little bit. In the meantime, let's check out the domain controller. Again, just to show you, nothing fancy, funny going on here. I have a default installation of Windows Active Directory Domain Services, just the default domain controller and default computers policies there. So let's pop over. I will also show you we have the same file from GitHub that I am about to run. We are going to do the no audit version of this script. Just to give you a little bit of context, the audit, or the version that doesn't say no audit, that felt weird to say, simply gives you some extra group policies for enhanced auditing. Some organizations need it, some don't. It depends on your stance. For all intents and purposes, we're just not going to drop any audit policies today. So if you do need audit policies, need better visibility on your workstation and your servers, check out what's in those audit policies.
And if you would, Nick, open up that sites.csv real quick in like Notepad.
Yeah.
So this is something we added in a while back. So if you need to add multiple sites, you can add to the CSV here and just add in your multiple sites, and the script will automatically create multiple GPOs for you to link to your multiple sites. So you just put in like a site name that's like something human readable for you, and then the FQDN for that site. And so you can add that in there.
So, and then also the Sysmon configurator, also on GitHub. Just show you that it is in the same condition that we pulled it down from there as. I think actually I told one mistruth. On the WEC, I added a single line that made that thing run a little bit faster. We'll probably make that push today. So full disclosure, I just remembered that. And
there is a list on the repo that there's a section for deployment, and that covers all the various files that you're going to need to adjust. You're going to need to adjust your winlet logbeat YAML file. If you're going to be using that, you need to adjust your CSV file. It tells you right where to find all those files and adjust them. So,
yep, we try to make that as findable as possible for everybody. So I am running the DC configurator script, the no audit version. It's asking me about that sites.csv file, so I'm just going to point at it here. All right, and it imported the relevant group policies we care about today, the Windows Event Forwarding and the WinRM enablement. So if we go back to group policy management, refresh everything, we'll see the two new policies are there. I'm just going to go ahead and link them to the top of our domain just to get things rolling for us. Wonderful. All right, I'm just going to go through and reboot a few of these hosts. We'll jump back on the Windows Event Collector and see if we start getting logs. Actually, no, I just skipped a part, didn't I? You didn't even have to interrupt me. Thank you. So, folks, because we're live, we're going to go back one moment in time. We're going to run our Sysmon configurator. One thing to note about this Sysmon configurator is it's going to ask you for a UNC path. What that UNC path is part of the scheduled task Noah alluded to earlier. We need some sort of network share to put the configuration file, put the Sysmon version that we expect to be running, some other details about it. So we created a share on this server, app01. It's just an apps share Sysmon folder in there. Be careful, of course, with permissions. We're doing this as restrictively as possible. We do need everyone to be able to read it for a few different reasons, but our domain admins are the only ones that can actually change files in here. So this path, app01, apps Sysmon will be our UNC path for this script. And it's finished. So what we should expect is a group policy object now be imported here.
Yep, and if you open up the share Nick too, we can show them the files we added to it.
Definitely. So I'm just going to link this. There we go. And there are the files now in the Sysmon share.
There we go. So that adds in the sysmon.ps1, which is the scheduled task itself. And then it's got the Sysmon binary and the Sysmon config.
So I'm actually going to not reboot this host while our other endpoints potentially try to check into it and get those files. I don't want to make that share unavailable. Sure, our workstations get a GP update. Wasn't as worried about the domain controller being a domain controller. Fantastic. Station 2. Station 3 is ready. Whack it's back up. Just check on our events in the event viewer.
It's happened, Nick. People have been looking at this repo that I've been working on for, a couple months now, and they found my typos in it already.
All right, so I'm just going to check out our subscriptions that we created. As you can see, there's 51 of them, created super painlessly, thanks to the magic of XML and looping through them. I can actually already see we have source computers, so a little bit of the magic of television here. This is not pre-recorded, despite our earlier banter. We did deploy logging in this slab last night, and then tore it all down. I suspect a lot of the hosts still had remnants of the group policy as far as what was going to be their WEC and what they needed to check into. So as soon as we actually activated the service and added subscriptions, I think they found it almost immediately. I would not expect all 5 of my computers to be checking in already. I would expect maybe 1 or 2. So if you run through this and you don't get all your machines immediately after rebooting them, be surprised. It does take a little bit of time for things to roll in. But just picking on a random subscription here, I can see all the hosts that we looked at, other than the WEC itself and the app server, are already sending their logs to those subscriptions. I open up the forwarded events channel in Event Viewer. Here we go. We have events from multiple systems rolling into a single Windows event collector.
Yeah, so from this point, you can actually just, like I showed in my section there with the Sysmon, you can just go to the filter current log and filter for specific events. So if you wanted to filter, Nick, for like a event code 22 or something like that, for DNS lookups, we can then pull like all these various DNS lookups. You can actually even in that filter section, there's a spot to filter by host. So computer down there, you can actually filter specifically for one specific computer. So if you're looking into something, so you can actually use Event Viewer as a relatively decent way to check logs. Like I said, it's not the fast, especially when you're dealing with large amounts of logs, but this is a centralized logging solution. And it's a good start, but you can take it to the next level and just use the WinLogBeat service to start shipping it up to an Elasticsearch cluster from there. So,
or any other,
or anything else,
or SIM. Yeah. This is definitely not a recommended way to manage your logs, because if you've ever used a large subset of logs within Event Viewer, you'll know it'll crash and burn and you'll have a hard time. But it does actually do a decent job, like Noah was saying, of kind of getting started. So really cool that Microsoft built this in.
Well, especially if you're like a small business that only has a few systems, like it might be more trouble than it's worth to set up an entire SIM. If you have like less than 10 systems for some reason or something like that, but this still lets you centralize your logs to a central point and allows you to review them and compare them from one system to another and do all that kind of work.
Absolutely.
So with that, we are definitely a little bit quick on that, but that more or less sums up the demo section. I do know we have a ton of questions that we can try to work through here.
I would love to.
We do have some specific shout outs too for to these projects here that have been useful for this. We pulled in a lot of this information to help pull it all together. Those are check out these projects that we've got linked here for sure. And
Kent and Jordan, they definitely built a lot of the optics deployment with their Applied Purple team. If you're not familiar with them, they're a couple of our testers. Go check out their GitHub or their company that they do some training with. They got a lot of awesome stuff going on for defenders. Olaf does an awesome job for the community on Sysmon Modular. We appreciate everything he does. And the Palantir project, I don't know much about Palantir, but they made creating those subscriptions so easy. big shout out to them for all that work and showing the world how to make that happen.
Hey, are
Hey,
we
Jason.
ready? Are we ready for Q&A?
Let's try
I
it,
think
man.
we are.
All right. So just in case you didn't know, we do have an active SOC at Black Hills. Okay. So this has the most questions that we've ever gotten during a webcast. So that also means we should probably do another webcast based on some of the questions that we got today. So just keep that in mind. But as we work through the questions today, we'll do the best we can. And I think we got a lot of questions today because people really want to implement this. And they're trying to figure out how it works for their special use case or their organization or their environment. So first one here. So stepping back, we're building a Windows endpoint VM for the WEC we're using, or are we using the WEC on the DC VM itself?
You're going to want to build a separate VM for that. For a lot of reasons, but one being like your DC, I'm a strong believer that your DC should be your DC and only your DC. Maybe a DNS server, but nothing else. So yeah, you're going to want to build a separate host, literally just a standard Windows base image of Windows Server, and then from there the script will transform it from that point.
Okay. Recommendations on a central SIM solution for an org around 3 to 350 person firm.
This is going to be a little biased, but we're an Elastic shop. We're pretty happy with Elastic. Pick your poison out there. Noah, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No,
I guess
it's relatively just kind of what you're used to and what you like to use. You could totally use WinLogMeet to ship it to Elastic. You could also just put Splunkd on your WEC host at that point and ship it to Splunk or any other of those aggregation platforms like that.
And I'm going to have you stop sharing your screen too so that we can get you full size.
I thought it did stop. Let me try again here, Jason.
Yeah, just stop.
Yeah. I have resume. I don't have stop. Power of Zoom.
Ryan, fix it.
I need adults.
All right. Best way to get started with Elastic Stack.
Well, that could be a whole webcast in and of itself, I would say. There's a ton of, I would say, I know that I've used a bunch of resources from like Logs.io. They have a bunch of tutorials on setting up your Elastic Stack. I can confirm that if you follow those tutorials and then you use this scripting that we've set up, that it will totally hook up because I've done it for dev labs all the time. So I guess that's kind of my recommendation on that. It very much, your use of Elastic is going to depend on how much logs you're sending it, because you start getting into things like sharding and sizing, how redundant your system has to be. You can set it up as a variable snowflake, so it just kind of depends a little bit on your use case. I know people hate that answer, but that's kind of where it's at on that one.
Sure. Can you forward these events to Waza? Sorry, instead of using their agent?
You could. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't.
Yeah, I've never used Waza, but I don't see why you couldn't either.
Okay. Do you plan on setting up a WinLogMeet demo?
I think that will probably be one of the next steps that will probably come out of these series of SOC webcasts. I'm assuming there'll be a series because people ask a lot of questions, want to know about logging, and
I would say that fits in really well with an Elastic type webcast that we might look into doing at some point.
Did anyone else want to keep singing "It's log, it's better than bad, it's good"? No, just me. No.
I did consider like that we should play that video before the webcast, but I figured there's probably all sorts of issues around that. So
right before I came here, actually, my wife reminded me that Ren and Stimpy have the log song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, seemed very fitting. It's been playing in my head all morning now.
Is Windows Event Forwarding still relevant with the rise of XDR solutions?
So, yes, it still is, because your logs are still going to be useful for an investigation. And it really depends on how you look at XDR. Like XDR, there's a couple like definitions out there for XDR, but a lot of times it's just an in-depth analysis of Windows logs. So yeah, I would say, take your Windows logs and then analyze them, and you have a comparable XDR solution.
Yeah, and I still feel like there's things that you will see in Windows logs that you just won't see in an XDR solution. Those are blue screens, those are memory errors, those are things that maybe you're not troubleshooting a security event, but maybe you are. I would always recommend.
That is a fantastic point, Nick, because we are a security company and a lot of our audience is a security audience. Like, this is still incredibly useful for your admins and debugging processes and figuring out that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you provide all the XML subscriptions you imported? Question mark. Where can we get them? Question mark.
They are in the GitHub project. No, I don't think we actually talked about the DEF CON levels. I think we might have meant to. Maybe that's point to fill in. I can try to bring this up for us.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to pull that up, we can kind of go over that real quick. The basic premise of the GitHub repo is it's based on DEF CON levels. DEF CON 4 being like, you could start here. You can actually go all the way, this cumulative roll-ups that take you all the way up to DEF CON 2, which is just implement full protection now. But if you want to slowly roll it out, DEF CON 4 would be something you just install on just your DCs, and you start pulling in those DC authentication logs. And that's where you're going to get those subscription files and that kind of stuff right there. So this DEF CON 4 WEF subscriptions, all these XML files are the actual subscriptions themselves. At DEF CON 3, we're talking about logging on like the servers as well. So you'd put this on like your IIS servers, on your app servers, on your file servers. It has Sysmon stuff in there, so you can get Sysmon on those servers. So you can be tracking the network connections coming to and from your servers. And then at DEF CON 2, that's enhanced auditing, and usually that's where you'd start putting in like your workstations as well. And so you just add your workstations to the same policies that you've put your servers on. So they install Sysmon on them. You'd have them forward their logs over. And then it also does some things like enabled PowerShell command logging and as well as some extra auditing on some of the servers. And Nick, if you have anything to add, feel free to add that on.
Nope, you nailed it. We were just trying to dissect this in a meaningful way. We knew that we couldn't ask people to try to collect all the logs all at once. You definitely have to, what do you want to say, crawl, walk, run. So that's where we just came up, like Noah elegantly walked through, starting small, adding on endpoints, adding on extra layers of visibility until you're at the last level that we've defined here, which it'll be interesting how this thing grows and changes as cybersecurity goes off through the years.
And one question I keep seeing repeated, Jason, sorry to cut you off there, but XDR versus Sysmon, like, does Sysmon still actually provide you more information? And I'll tell you that from a number of investigations where customers have given me their XDR platform and they'd be like, I need you to investigate problems or look into stuff. I almost always finding myself wanting that Sysmon data, that Sysmon level verbose data, because the XDR it seems to fall short usually. So personally, I say Sysmon definitely provides more information than just an XDR solution by itself.
And for all the people wondering, yes, you can get my Rekka hoodie from the Spearfish channel store. So let's say I work for an MSP and my stakeholders are cheap. Can we get by on Windows Server Essentials licensing, or is there some magic way to do this with Linux distros and tools?
I can't think of any limitations from Essential licensing. As far as I know, I've never tried with Essential licensing. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to run Windows Event Collecting or Windows Event Forwarding with that.
I can't think why, but it's not necessarily a supported use case for this talk, I would say. As for Linux, I don't think we have any solutions that would do it for Linux, no.
Does the BHIS SOC collect Windows events logs too?
We sure do.
All right.
Okay. Using this exact same method outlined in this talk.
This is exactly how we deploy it for customers. Yep.
Let's see. Graves. Ben, you seen anything that I missed? Someone said, how did you just keep a straight face as Jason sang that last song? Just Nick is a stoic human being. Like, there's nothing that seems to phase Nick.
You even jumped out with a knife at me at the last con, Jason. And I didn't flinch.
I did. I only pulled my knife on 2 people, and both of them were not in self-defense. So. Does your Sysmon config need any specific advanced audit configurations enabled?
Wow, you
I guess I don't understand the question.
I think I understand the question. I think that's related to our discussion about the audit policies, the group policy audit policies. I think they're asking, without applying those policies, do you still get the full usage out of the Sysmon config that we've supplied?
And the answer to that is yes. Because the subscription, no, it is. And the reason why is if you think about the way that the subscriptions are working in DEF CON 4, which are applied, it's asking like if you have this log, send it to me is effectively how it's coming. So if the Sysmon operational log exists, that subscription will pull it. It doesn't require the advanced auditing PS1 to be ran.
Thank you. Yes, because the advanced auditing policies are all going to be like OS type things, like enhanced file access, user
we're
changes.
enabling extra Windows logs, like the built-in Windows logs.
Yeah, thank you, Noah, for walking me through that. Yes, exactly correct.
Brian, did you hop in because you want to help with questions, or you want to help answer questions?
Well, definitely not the second one. First one, I thought I answered a lot of this one. How do we manage stale log sources? That would make sense.
Stale log sources. I'm not sure if I understand.
Yeah, what we've seen is they tend to just fall off after a bit, but they haven't caused any issues with us so far.
So then they went on to say, I've seen the event collectors get to the point where the server is functioning, but going into an event viewer and trying to change anything in the subscriptions is almost impossible. Event viewer just hangs on for a long time. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And personally, like if I encounter that situation, I just drop to the CLI, but that's probably not the best answer.
I was going to say I would probably drop to the CLI to start troubleshooting and figuring out maybe some of the issues, but it sounds like a resource contention problem, so I'd probably be checking out resources on that WEC.
Well, and they even said they had a very large environment, which later on I think they referenced they had like close to like I think 17,500.
Holy buckets, that is a lot.
Yeah, and something to keep track of with WEX is that disk which is not necessarily something that as a sysadmin you're always checking. Usually you're checking your CPU, your RAM, sometimes even your network card. But you don't always check your disk. With a WEC, disk is actually really important because especially when you're in the event, you're trying to make changes, you're trying to read and write a lot of data, especially when you have very large environments. That actually cumulatively adds up to be a very large amount of data. I usually recommend, if you can, put your WECs on SSDs, but that's not always a possible move.
So, and Brian, what I think we'll do is I'll ask a question, you ask a question, I'll ask a question.
Yep. Great.
What if I have issues using the BHIS GitHub repos? Who can I ask?
You can open an issue on the repo. I mean, that would be a good start, I would say.
I think, that'd be the best way to start to get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
I do make sure to watch that repo, so if you make an issue request, I'll try to get to it as soon as I can.
I think the first time we ever heard about this repo, I think John was doing a training or something and was like, hey, I really wish we had this. I wish we had this. Like, maybe we should put that together. And you were like, no, I already made that.
I just dropped the link and John's like, wait, what? And I'm like, no, it already exists.
Yeah, I've been working on that for months. I just,
Cool. So one thing I've seen a lot of questions around cloud, which Azure and AD environments and things like that, like stuff that's in the cloud. I guess what can you speak to in that regard?
Sure. So if it's running a Windows console that you can actually access, manipulate, you can 100% just do the things that I showed you through the live demo. It is no different installing or configuring any of those services. What I can say specifically about AWS, I have to remember the service. It's like they're minimized or they're small, they're tiny. I can't remember what they call it, but it's a smaller Windows directory, Active Directory environment. It's not a full-blown ADDS console, so you can't open like a group policy management console. We can actually run these scripts on a host and still configure all the settings that we want and still apply the group policies that we want to get logs flowing from one of those small, tiny, whatever they call it, Active Directory environments within AWS. I've actually done it, seen it work, so yeah, I know that's possible.
Cool. And I accidentally killed somebody's question. It was a very simple question. I was going to try to answer it. I thought I could just type it in, but I didn't because I'm stupid. Elastic is an open source SIM. That's what we're talking about. That somebody just had a real quick question around that. So,
yep. And in that question, they actually asked if they could use it with something like Security Onion. Security Onion actually has it built right in. So,
thanks.
Are there any security concerns with having your WEC exposed to the internet for just port 5985? We have many endpoints that don't use VPN all the time. So I'm wondering if we just exposing it to the internet would solve the issue and not getting logs all the time.
Sounds like a bad idea to me.
Yeah, so there's technically no reason why it couldn't be done, but it makes everyone uncomfortable every time we talked about it, and I feel like that's just a lot of research is required around that. But it's still a Windows remote access service that you're opening up to the internet. It just makes everyone super uncomfortable with it. For some people, we've had some customers where they had like a remote site, and they wanted to ship it across the WAN, and we were fine with the way that the traffic was being shipped, but we did recommend that the firewall rules limit to that site's WAN address. This is definitely kind of one of the major shortcomings of using Windows Event Forwarding is what happens when I have out-of-band off-prem host. How do I do that? This is relying a lot on Active Directory, and it's relying on the fact that it can connect. Now, what I will say is if your host goes out of band for a period of time, and it's not connected to your corporate network, it will store its logs directly in its local event store. As soon as it reconnects, it will ship those logs up. Now, that local event store can hold a couple days worth of logs usually, especially if you're not using Sysmon. And so when it comes back in band to your system, it will upload all those logs to your WEC server from there. Is it real-time logging? Not exactly, but it does get the logs there.
Unless, of course, they haven't, logged into the VPN for like a year and they're a salesman.
It does happen. It does happen where, if you have like a traveling salesman and all they need is Office 365, you might not ever see the logs from them. It is definitely
until they click
with this solution.
And then they log in.
well, one thing to add to that is like one of the things that we do because we have like active SOC, like we're actively doing things. Is that part of threat simulation to see if that is a problem to have that connected to the internet?
I would say no, personally. No, not necessarily in that regard. So when we do adversarial simulation within ours, it's a validation phase within everything we do within our SOCs, not just the Windows, the event collection and log collection and analysis stuff. I mean, we do AD reviews for the customers. We help them implement cyber deception. We do a 24/7, 365 threat hunting. But the attack simulation has more so to do with validating that the alerts that we are putting in, the rule sets that we're putting into the SIM, if we do a certain type of an attack, do those alerts fire? Can we see these things? Can we cross-correlate those from MITRE and our own attack techniques along with the rule sets that we have and map them over and make sure that we're actually getting the proper alerts that are firing, making sure that there's not like a big gap in terms of our coverage.
Yeah. And I would add, there are mitigations you can do to lower the susceptibility of this, because you can require that those offsite machines connect to the VPN. You can use something like Elastic Agent if you're using an Elastic Stack, and you can ship directly to it with using that.
That's right.
There's a number of ways that you can work around that problem. It's just that is definitely a problem with this particular stack, but you can utilize other stacks to augment that to get more coverage.
Right. And that's what we do with ours. Is we have people who work distributed, like the work from home force. We have to drop Elastic Agent on there in order to get these logs and everything sent up to our SIM.
Yep.
My follow-up next question is: would you recommend placing the Sysmon configuration stored on net logon or sysvol directories to make available for read across the network? If no, why?
You could. There's no reason why you couldn't.
I would just make sure your security permissions are locked down appropriately, but otherwise, no reason you can't use those.
Yep. The main thing with that is you want, and just to expand on what Nick was saying about the security permissions, because it's a scheduled task, if that file ever gets replaced with something malicious, then technically all of your computers are going to check in and run that file. So just like if you're playing Hack the Box or something and you want to exploit like a cron job that's running, it's the exact same scenario. So you got to make sure that the file permissions on that PS1 file and those binary executables is locked down as much as you can.
And you get the next one?
Oh man, I don't even know where you were at. I'm just gonna grab one. What about collecting from client computers? I think we already did that one. Graylog is open source too. They do Graylog. They do 60,000 assets. I'm not really finding much other questions. Is there other ones that you guys are seeing that I'm not?
One of the new cards in Backdoors and Breaches, the ICS deck, is to get into the scheduled task and cause something malicious, and that's how you get pivot and escalation. Yeah, that's right. Yes, White Cyberduck. I did bust out the new ICS deck of Backdoors and Breaches too. All right.
James had a question about registry auditing, which we find registry auditing to be pretty useful at times. I mean, you have run keys that you can set in there. You can do COM object hijacking through the registry. So yeah, registry auditing is definitely an extremely useful feature.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up. I mean, we do have a lot of questions, but what we'll do is we'll take all the questions. I'll give them to Nick and Noah, and we'll go through and see which one needs to be a new webcast and which one can be a live stream on Tuesday or Wednesday, where we just get into very specific things. Where we've been doing it for the last month or so. So on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, Antisyphon does a live stream on Twitch and YouTube, where you can go ahead and watch, and we just dive right in. There's no pre-show banter. We dive right in. We cover something specific. I've been learning more. Sorry, Nick and Noah. I've been learning more on the live streams on Tuesdays and Wednesdays than I have, because it's like a very specific thing that gets into like, and this is what this means, and this is what this means, and this is what this means. I'm like, oh, finally. So Nick and Noah, if you want to show up on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and get into something real specific to what you covered today, and like dive like so deep into it, you can possibly just like get all nuanced in it. That'd be great. Thank you all so much for joining us for this Black Hills Information Security webcast. Noah, do you have any final words? And then Nick, if you have final words.
You can purchase Backdoors and Breaches from the Spearfish General Store.
That is correct. And Noah has taken over playing Backdoors and Breaches with people here at Black Hills, so that way I can work on other things like zines and new editions of Backdoors and Breaches and a lot of swag. We have so much swag coming. Nick, do you have any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. Thanks everybody for showing up. Appreciate all the questions and all the banter from everybody.
Brian, I've never given you the chance to have final thoughts. Do you have final thoughts?
Oh man, I always have more thoughts, but I don't think they're relevant to this. No, I think this was good. Actually, it was insane, because I had to message Deb while this was going on. I was like, this seems like more questions than normal.
Yeah.
But I think it's good, because I think stuff like this, these blue team topics, like we do so much red team stuff, and I think it's good. But when we start doing these red team topics, there's a lot of people out there that are like, yeah, I need to know. Like, I like seeing how you can own me. That makes me feel great. But now, how do I secure myself better? So these blue team topics, I really love to do.
Yeah. All right, everybody. If you ever need an active SOC, you know where to find us. Red Hunt, Threat Team, all that other stuff for decks of cards, backdoors, and breaches. Yep. And that's it. All right, Ryan, kill it with fire. We're done for today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.